I'm just delighted to introduce today Congressman and Dr. Bera. Congressman Bera has represented Sacramento County in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2013. Congressman Bera is currently a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he serves as ranking member of the Subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific. He's also a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. He's a member of the New Democrat Coalition, a group of over 100 forward-thinking Democrats who are committed to pro-economic growth, pro-innovation, and fiscally responsible policies. Most importantly for us here in the room, he's an incredible champion of social connection, social isolation, and loneliness, and has recently reintroduced his legislation with Congressman Mike Flood, who we actually heard from last year at our summit, the Improving Measurements for Loneliness and Isolation Act. So Dr. Bera, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It disappeared off my chat GPT, but I asked chat GPT, how should Congress think about loneliness and social isolation? It actually got it pretty accurate, right? We should think about this as a public health crisis, right? And address it partly from that angle. We should think about it from an economic perspective. We should think about it from a healthcare perspective. We should empower community organizations and to do a lot of this. And I do think about it from that perspective. I'm an internist as well by training. And one of the things we did when I was a first-year medical student, we had a program called Senior Buddies, where we just paired a medical student up with a senior, and it was really interesting. I mean, that was not about learning disease and diagnosis and so forth. It was about social connection, right? And it mattered to me. It also mattered to that senior. And all we had to do was once a month, once a quarter, set up a time, go have lunch together, go visit them. That carried forward into my career when I was practicing. I used to do house calls, right? And, we didn't get reimbursed for them, but it never made sense to me for a patient who might be bedridden or something to come in for a 15-minute blood pressure check, because that meant a family member had to take a whole day off. They had to figure out transportation, et cetera. It's like, now, you know what? Let's set up a time after I'm done in the office. I'll swing by the house. And I also got the benefit, they always fed me. So, but as a doctor, you saw how they live, right? Those are intangibles that you're not going to see in the exam room. You saw, what their lives were like. It provided really valuable information. One of the fun things that I get to do, or eye-opening things, is actually go out and deliver meals with Meals on Wheels. And I encourage every member of Congress to do that, because you'll see the social isolation in our senior population, right? For many of those seniors, the only human contact they have is when that person's delivering those meals. So that's why this is incredibly important. So we've known the social isolation in our senior population, but what really brings me to why I think this is a real urgent issue is what I'm seeing in the young population. Right? It was certainly there pre-pandemic. The pandemic certainly accelerated things. We're certainly seeing it in the anxiety, depression, diseases of despair, suicide in our young population. When I think about young men in particular, I think you're seeing that stunted development in terms of communication skills, ability to think more rapidly than we are in young women. And what is causing that? So part of the reason why Congressman Flood and I have our legislation, and there's a Senate companion on the Senate side, I think, with Senator Murphy and Senator Ricketts. Both of you think about this a lot as well. Is because we've got to understand this. We've got to understand the root causes, and it may not be that it's legislation that we do, but can we support community organizations that start to create a context of, getting people out and so forth. I always joke that for those of us that are old enough, we had physical education when we had to wear those real short shorts and a white T-shirt with our name on it. That wasn't a bad thing, because you got people outside doing things. So. Recently I met with Major League Baseball, and it was about a number of things, but then talk to them about socializing. It's like, how do we get kids out playing more and doing things? Because I think there's a natural inclination for kids to want to go out and play and be part of team sports. And so from there, like, look, we're all in because, you know, the more kids that are playing baseball, the more future fans we have. And every professional sports is going to do that. So I think that's the next piece of it. How do we do a public campaign to get kids playing? So, and then the last thing, the thing that keeps me awake at night is AI and how this might impact. Again, I think about it from the context of young men. You know, an AI girlfriend is not a human girlfriend, and you know that aspect of AI is taking off dramatically. I can, you know, my fear is the 15-year-old going through puberty, racing home, locking their door, and staying up all night with a fake bot girlfriend. And I don't know, we can't legislate against that, but we ought to understand it because I think that's going to accelerate things here. You know, from the healthcare perspective, how we train our future healthcare workforce is going to be incredibly important. And you know, we do a great job teaching people how to diagnose and treat disease, but I don't think any of us thinks of ourselves as a disease, right? I mean, I'm a 6-year-old man who's married 34 years with a 27-year-old daughter, and I may have an affliction, but we ought to start there with that person's life. What's the context of their life? And you know, my clinical interests were going towards end of life care, towards hospice, because that's the one moment in time where it's not about the disease, it's about the person. It's in the context. And you know, how I think about the loneliness piece is how do we think about people and communities as individuals? Now, the one thing I know in healthcare is with certainty that I'm going to die one day, right? So by definition, I feel like I'm in a hospice program already. So I don't have to wait until the end of my life to find reconciliation and think about that. Now, how do we do that at a community level? What does that look like? We've also been meeting with David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, who's obviously been writing about this a lot. And, you know, the former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, you know, written a whole book on this. So don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think this is a public epidemic that is coming at us very quickly, and we've got to address this. So I'm great that the three of you are up here and thinking about it. And I think we've got to rethink how we deliver healthcare, because there is an economic argument. None of us wants to die alone in a hospital hooked up to a bunch of machines, but that is how most of us die. A lot of people die that way. Most of us, you were to ask the patient, it's like, no, I'd rather actually be at home surrounded by my loved ones. And yeah, that means a little bit less longevity, but the quality of my life's better. I mean, that's how I'd like to die. So then we should ask the question, how do we want to live? And most of us don't want to live in isolation. Most of us want to have those connections. And what does that look like? I'm an old guy now, so I don't do social media. I mean, I'm sure someone does it for me, but I don't have a Facebook page, TikTok, or Instagram. I'm trying to slow my life down. I'm reading books again. I'm breaking out the vinyl and listening to record albums, and also in a very intentional way, trying to call old college friends and say, hey, what's wrong? We haven't talked in a while. And you know, doing those things that, so I think combating loneliness is also a very intentional thing. So how do we think about policies that bring folks out of their homes? And you know, I don't totally know that, but I think communities, states, governments have to think about that. You know, and I'll just close with an anecdote. When our daughter was in 4th grade, or when I was growing up, both my parents worked. So, you know, my mom was a school teacher. I'd have to get it, pour myself a bowl of Fruit Loops, eat it, lock the door, and walk to school. And nobody ever gave a second thought. When our daughter was in 4th grade, she asked if she could walk home from school. And it created a lot of anxiety in me as a parent. And I went and did the research. Now, there are far more kidnappings when I was a kid than there is today. The world is an incredibly safer place today. So I had to overcome my own anxiety. It's like, yeah, you should be able to walk home and go outside and play. And I think that's, again, this is just subjectively, there's something about, you know, cable news and social media that's creating a culture of anxiety and fear that is then preventing our ourselves from allowing our kids to be kids and doing things. You know, after school sports was just the thing that we did when I was a kid. But you know, that seems to be rarer today. And yeah. So I didn't totally answer the question, but I do think it is incredibly important for Congress to understand this epidemic that's taking place in America, to understand the root causes. You know, certainly is a cause of depression, anxiety. You know, certainly to some extent probably does contribute to the fentanyl epidemic and the suicide epidemic in this country. And if we want to address it, the first step is actually understanding it, and that's why, you know, that's the approach that we've taken. So thank you for this convening. Hopefully you do this on a regular basis, and you know, as you start to think about ideas, obviously reach out to our office. I think you're going to hear from Becca Balin. You know, she's another one who's really thinking about this, and we're going to try to get more of our colleagues to think about and understand and then test things in communities. So thank you.
But thank you so much, Dr. Bera. I want to just comment on one thing that you mentioned, which is the, I think, powerful connection to end of life care and hospice care, which is coming up more and more. We have hospice leaders here in the room and folks nationally that are focused on higher quality end of life care in this country. At the Action Network, we're really interested in thinking about how we might, for example, leverage hospice volunteer programs that are in communities across the nation, going into people's homes and not just providing respite to the family who is caring for the ill person, but also creating that social connection. So that's one of the ideas that, you know, I think is a good example of how our members and how our folks and our team thinks at the Action Network and trying to bridge these connections. And Dr. Bera, I thought, did it well. So we're so honored to have him as a champion on the Hill.